you think that you lost. Oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We all have our reasons why we are on this track. Oh, we all have our burdens, yeah, but we just keep on fighting and we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. When you feel it's hopeless, when you think that you lost, oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We all have our reasons why we are on this track. Oh, we all have our burdens, yeah, but we just keep on fighting and we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne.
Okay. There, now we have sound. I'm sorry I didn't notice it before. Ugh. I don't know why this thing's been doing that lately. Very annoying. Every time I bring up um, OSB Studio, it doesn't have my audio connected, and I don't notice it right away. So I look like an idiot sitting here talking to nothing. All right, so let's start this shit over again, shall we? God, that's fucking annoying. So we're on chapter 7, tactic number 4. Help them trick their readers. So we have this screenshot and from New York Times Magazine and a quote. The screenshot has 5 numbered entries. 1 is sitting a lethal activity. 2, how little sleep can you get away with? 3, is sugar toxic? 4, what's the single best exercise? 5, do cell phones cause brain cancer? And it says that it's a screenshot of the most popular articles box, New York Times Magazine, April 16th, 2011. Then the quote: I am not surprised when anonymous scribblers write and publish falsehoods or make criticism on matters with which they know nothing about or which they are incapable of comprehending. It is their trade, they live by it. General William Tecumseh Sherman. Okay, so luckily I noticed before I got too much farther that I didn't have any fucking sound. So I will try to do better in the next one and not look do that. All right. Are loaded question headlines popular? You bet. As Brian Moylan, a former Gawker writer, once bragged, the key is to, quote, get the whole story into the headline but leave out just enough that people will want to click, end quote. Nick Denton knows that being evasive and misleading is one of the best ways to get traffic and increase the bottom line. In a memo to his bloggers, he gave specific instructions on how to best manipulate the reader for profit. Quote, when examining a claim, even a dubious claim, don't dismiss with a skeptical headline before getting to your main argument, because nobody will get to your main argument. You might as well not bother. You set up a mystery and explain it after the link. Some analysis shows a good question brings twice the response of an emphatic, as an emphatic exclamation point. End quote. I have my own analysis. When you take away the question mark, it usually turns their headline into a lie. The reason bloggers like to use it is because it lets them get away with a false statement that no one can criticize. After the reader clicks, they soon discover that the answer to the question in their headline is obviously no, of course not. But since it was posed as a question, the blogger wasn't wrong. They were only asking. Quote, did Glenn Beck rape and murder a young girl in 1990, end quote. Sure, I don't know, whatever, gets clicks. Sure, I don't know, whatever gets clicks. Okay. Bloggers tell themselves that they are just tricking the reader with the headline to get them to read the nuanced, fairer articles. But that's a lie. I actually read the articles and they're rarely any better than the headline would suggest. This lie is just one blogger's tell to feel better about themselves, and you can exploit it. So give them a headline. It's what they want. Let them rationalize it privately however they need to. When I want someone to write about my clients, I might intentionally exploit their ambivalence about deceiving people. If I'm giving them an official comment on behalf of a client, I leave room for them to speculate by not fully addressing the issue. If I'm creating the story as a fake tipster, I ask a lot of rhetorical questions. Could some preposterous misreading of the situation be what's going on? Do you think that juicy scandal is what they're hiding? And when I watch as and then I watch as the reader sorry, and then I watch as the writers pose those very same questions to their readers in a click-friendly headline. The answer to my question is obviously no, of course not, but I play the skeptic about my own clients, even going so far as to say nasty things, so the bloggers will do it on the front page of their site. Manipulators trick the bloggers and they trick the readers. We both want the clicks and so we get them together. This arrangement is great for the traffic hungry bloggers, for people like me and my attention seeking clients. Readers might be better served by posts that inform them about things that really matter. But as you saw in the last chapter, stories with useful information are less likely to be shared virally than other types of content. And we're supposed to be going into an ad here in just a second. Um, we'll see. Sometimes it kind of deceives me. Don't quite get that. Okay, we were are in an ad. I don't know. Okay. For example, movie reviews, in-depth tutorials, technical analysis, and recipes are typically popular with the initial audience and occasionally appear on most emailed lists. But they tend no. Yeah, the ads are weird. It keeps telling me I'm going into an ad and then it doesn't. So I never know whether it's actually going to do it. Um, but they tend not to draw a significant amount of traffic from other websites. They're less fun to share and spread less as a result. This may seem counterintuitive at first, but it makes perfect sense according to the economics of online content. Commentary on top of someone else's commentary or advice is cumbersome and often not very interesting to read. Worse, the writer of the original material may have been so thorough as to have solved the problem or proffered a reasonable solution. Two very big dampers on getting a heated debate going. For blogs, practical utility is often a liability. It is a traffic killer. So are other potentially positive attributes. It's hard to get trolls angry enough to comment while being fair or reasonable. Waiting for the whole story to unfold can be a surefire way to eliminate the possibility for follow-up posts. So can pointing out that an issue is frivolous. Being the voice of reason does also. No blogger wants to write about another blogger who made him or her look bad. To use an exclamation point to refer back to Denton's remark is to be final. Being final or authoritative or helpful or any of these obviously positive attributes is avoided because they don't bait user engagement, and engaged users are where the money is. Okay? Getting engaged with content. Being Before objecting that user engagement is a good thing, let's look at it in practice. Pretend for a second that you read an article on some blog about an issue that makes you angry. Angry enough that you must let the author know how you feel about it. You go to leave a comment. You must be logged in to comment, the site tells you. Not yet a member? Register now. Click, a new page comes up with ads all across it. Fill out the form on the page, handing over an email address, gender, and city, and hit submit. Damn, got the captcha wrong, so the page reloads with another ad. Finally get it right and get the confirmation page. Another page, another ad. Check email. Click this link to validate your account. Registration is now complete, it says. Another page and another ad. Log in. More pages, more ads. But you have finally engaged. This is how it is anymore. Everywhere. It might take as many as 10 page views to leave a comment on a blog the first time, or when you see a mistake in an article and fill out the send corrections form. Well, first they'll need your email address, and then they ask if you want to receive daily emails from them. When you do this, you were the sucker. The site doesn't care about your opinion. They care that by eliciting it, they score free page views. Of course, this kind of manipulation is not new. It is endemic to all kinds of media. Jonah Peretti of BuzzFeed once pointed out how reality TV sucks in viewers. Quote, the reason that reality TV worked well for a time is that the classic reality TV formula in the beginning was the tribal council and somebody getting eliminated. So you could have 50% of the show being boring filler, and you're kind of wanting to change the channel, but you're like, Oh, but I wonder if my favorite person's going to get eliminated. So you have to watch to the end to see the elimination. In a way, that was a way of gaming time. End quote. And now online publishers have found their own ways to manipulate audiences, whether it's with the 13-page slideshow or exploiting the so-called headline gap or auto-playing a video. As Andrew Ledvina, a former Facebook data scientist, bluntly put it, quote, the fundamental purpose of most people at Facebook working on data is to influence and alter people's moods and behavior. They are doing it all the time to make you like stories more, to click on more ads, to spend more time on the site, end quote. Blogs don't care about the issues they're provoking outrage about, and social networks don't care what people are being social about. They care about what it means for them, how much traffic and time on site it generates. I remember reading a video games blog post of all the reasons why someone should buy the next PlayStation console over the Xbox. It got like 500,000 views. Then the same blogger turned around and wrote about all the reasons to buy the Xbox over the PlayStation. It also got 500,000 views. There were plenty of comments and shares on both. Nobody involved actually cares what any of these people think or are feeling, not even a little bit. They just care about the reaction and the attention. Who is the real troll? Mike Cernovich, the alt-right blogger, is often called a troll by people in the media. He has come to embrace the label. He is smart enough to know that if he says something offensive, liberals won't be able to resist responding. He knows that this response will generate attention and raise his profile. But if this is so obvious and clear, isn't the media at least partly responsible if they give blatant trolling attempts a wider audience? Aren't they complicit? I believe they are. I'll give you an example. In 2012, my client, Tucker Max, was looking to make a large charitable donation, but wanted to get publicity for it. He had a joke in one of his books that he had paid for so many abortions over the years, Planned Parenthood should name a clinic after him. My idea was to make that a reality, to buy the naming rights for a clinic. As it turned out, Planned Parenthood had not only been viciously stripped of its Texas funding by Republican Governor Rick Perry, but also were looking to open a new clinic in North Texas. It seemed like a win-win-win. Tucker gets press for something positive for a change, Planned Parenthood reaches a new audience, and women get access to potentially life-saving services. No comment on that. But this was also clearly trolling. It was going to piss a lot of people off and promote his new book. When Planned Parenthood declined to accept the donation, after a few weeks of serious negotiations, I wrote an article about it for Forbes.com titled, quote, Why Did Planned Parenthood Turn Down $500,000, end quote. I then sent this link to dozens of sites I had researched based on their probability of writing about the story. Many of them picked it up, including the Huffington Post, Jezebel, Salon, the Daily Beast, KVUE TV, Austin, KFDM TV, Beaumont, KGO AM San Francisco, the New York Daily News, Gothamist, and the Houston Chronicle. I had one of my employees compile all the links from the stunt. The first wave of attention alone was 8 pages, single spaced, 8 pages of links. After we submitted some of these links to Reddit, the story traded up the chain and got even more important outlets involved. Again, I fully admit this was trolling, but I assert that the media participated in it. They certainly benefited from it. The Huffington Post story alone got over 10,000 Facebook shares. The coverage added up to 8 pages of links. Just think of how many views, clicks, and shares that is. I was hoping for 50,000 page views for the whole thing. Cumulatively, it did millions. I hoped for a couple blog pickups. We got coverage in 200 plus outlets. Not only did I get all this press for free, but Forbes.com paid me $1,000 cash for my share of the page views the controversy generated. So who is the real troll here? Me or my friends in the media? You are being played. Oh. A click is a click and a page view is a page view. A blogger doesn't care how you get it, how they get it. Their bosses don't care. They just want it. The headline is there to get uh, sorry. The headline is there to get you to view the article, end of story. Whether you get anything out of it after is irrelevant. The click already happened. A comment section is meant to be used. So are those share buttons at the bottom of every post. The dirty truth, the brilliant writer Venkatesh Rao pointed out is that, quote, social media isn't a set of tools to allow humans to communicate with humans. It is a set of embedding mechanisms to allow technologies to use humans to communicate with each other. In an orgy of self-organizing, the Matrix had it wrong. You're not the battery power in a global human enslaving AI. You are slightly more valuable. You are part of the switching circuitry. End quote. As a user, the fact that blogs are unhelpful, deliberately misleading, or unnecessarily incendiary might exhaust and tire you, but Orwell reminded us in 1984, quote, the weariness of the cell is the vigor of the organism, end quote. So goes the art of the online publisher, to string the customer along as possible. To deliberately not be helpful is to turn simple readers into page view generating machines. Publishers know they have to make each new headline even more irresistible than the last, the next article even more inflammatory or less practical to keep getting clicks. It's a vicious cycle in which, by screwing the reader and getting screwed by me, they just screw the reader harder next time to top what they did before. And sure, sometimes people get mad when they realize they've been tricked. Readers don't like to learn that the story they read was baseless. Readers get pissed when they find out the link they clicked was for some sponsored content. Bloggers aren't pleased when they fall for a hoax, but this is a calculated risk bloggers and I both take, mostly because the consequences are so low. In the rare cases we're caught red-handed, it's not like we have to give the money we made back. A juvenile joke, quote, what's infamy matter if you can keep your fortune, end quote. All right, and that is the end of that chapter. That was shorter than some of the others, so let's see how long this next one is. If it's real long, I will still read it. This one's not too bad either. So this takes us up to chapter 8, Tactic 5, sell them something they can sell to be in the news, make news. And our quote is, a newspaper is a business out to make money through advertising revenue. That is predicated on its circulation, and you know what the circulation depends on. End quote. And that's by Harlan Potter in The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler. Okay. I'm no media scholar, but in my fanatical search for what makes bloggers tick, I turned to every media historian I could find and devoured their work. Through these experts, I started to see the very the very way that blogs get their articles in front of readers predetermines what they write. Just like the yellow press of a century ago, blogs are at the mercy of unrelenting pressures that compel them to manipulate the news and be manipulated in turn. History lessons can be boring, but trust me, in this case, a brief one is worth it because it unlocks a new angle of media control. Once you know how the newsmen sell their product, it becomes easier to sell them yours. There are three distinct phases of the newspaper which have been synonymous with the news for most of history. It begins with the party press, moves to the infamous yellow press, and ends finally with the stable period of the modern press, or press by subscription. These phases contain surprising parallels to where we are today with blogs. Old mistakes made once more, manipulations made possible again for the first time in decades. The party press. The earliest forms of newspapers were a function of political parties. They were media outlets for party leaders to speak to party members, to give them the information they needed and wanted. It's a part of news history that is often misunderstood or misused in discussions about media bias. These papers were not some early version of Fox News. They usually were one-man shops. The editor, publisher, writer, printer was the dedicated steward of a very valuable service to that party in his town. The service was the ability to communicate ideas and information about important issues. These political papers sold the service to businessmen, politicians, and voters. It was sold on a subscription model, typically about $10 a year. A good paper might have only 1,000 or so subscribers, but subscriptions were almost always mandatory for party members in certain areas, which was a kind of patronage. This first stage of journalism was limited in its scope and impact. Because of the size and nature of its audience, the party press was not in the news business. They were in the editorial business. It was a different time and style, one that would be eclipsed by changes in technology and distribution. The yellow press. Newspapers changed the moment that Benjamin Day launched the New York Sun in 1833. It was not so much his paper that changed everything, but his way of selling it. On the street, one copy at a time. He hired the unemployed to hawk his papers and immediately solved a major problem that had plagued the party presses: unpaid subscriptions. Day's, quote, cash and carry, end quote, method offered no credit. You bought and walked. The Sun, with this simple innovation in distribution, invented the news and the newspaper. 1,000 imitators followed. These papers weren't delivered to your doorstep. They had to be exciting and loud enough to fight for their sales on street corners, in bar rooms, and in train stations. Because of the change in distribution methods and the increased speed of the printing press, newspapers truly became newspapers. Their sole aim was to get new information, get it to print faster, get it more exclusively than their competition. It meant the decline of the editorial. These papers relied on gossip. Papers that resisted failed and went out of business, like abolitionist Horace Greeley's disastrous attempt at a gossip-free cash and carry paper shortly before dailies. Days. In 1835, shortly before day began, James Gordon Bennett, Sr., launched the New York Herald. Within just a few years, the Herald would be the largest circulation daily in the United States, perhaps in the world. It would also be the most sensational and vicious. It was all these things not because of Bennett's personal beliefs, but because of his business beliefs. He knew that the newspaper's role was, quote, not to instruct but to startle, end quote. His paper was anti-black, anti-immigrant, and anti-subtlety. These causes sold papers to both people who loved them for it and people who hated them for it, and they bought and they bought. Bennett was not alone. Joseph Pulitzer, a sensationalist newsmonger long before his name was softened by years of association with the prestigious Pulitzer Prize, enforced a similar dictum with his paper. The world would be, quote, not only cheap but bright, not only bright but large, end quote. It had to be, in order to sell thousands of papers every morning to busy people in a busy city. The need to sell every issue anew each day creates a challenge I call the one-off problem. Bennett's papers solved it by getting attention however they could. The first issue of Bennett's Herald looked like this. First page, eye-catching but quickly digestible miscellany. Second page, the heart of the paper, editorial and news. Third page, local. Fourth page, advertising and filler. There was something for everyone. It was short, zesty. He later tried to emphasize quality editorial instead of disposable news by swapping the first 2 pages. The results were disastrous. He couldn't sell papers on the street that way. The one-off problem shaped more than just the design and layout of the newspaper. When news is sold on a one-off basis, publishers can't sit back and let the news come to them. There isn't enough of it, and what comes naturally isn't exciting enough. So they must create the news that will sell their papers. When reporters were sent out to cover spectacles and events, they knew that their job was to cover the news when it was there and to make it up when it was not. This is exactly the same position blogs are in today. Just as blogs are fine with manipulators easing their burden, so too were the yellow papers. Yellow papers paid large sums to tipsters and press agents. Fakes and embellishments were so pervasive that the noted diarist and lawyer George Templeton Strong almost didn't believe the Civil War had commenced. In April 1861 he wrote in his diary that he and his friends had deliberately ignored noise they heard. The streets, vocal with newsboys, shout, "Extra! A herald! Get the bombardment of Fort Sumter!" For nearly 4 blocks because they were convinced it was a sell. That Fort Sumter issue, which Strong broke down and bought, sold 135,000 copies in a single day. It was the most printed issue in the history of the Herald. The success of that war was what drove yellow papers to clamor for, and some say create, the Spanish-American War. As Benjamin Day put it, quote, "We newspaper people thrive best on the calamities of others," end quote. Media historian W. J. Campbell once identified the distinguishing markers of yellow journalism as follows, and we have a bulleted list here. So, first, one, prominent new headlines that screamed excitement about ultimately unimportant news. 2. Lavish use of pictures, often of little relevance. 3. Imposters, frauds, and faked interviews. 4. Color comics and a big, thick Sunday supplement. 5. Ostentatious support for the underdog causes. 6. Use of anonymous sources. 7. Prominent coverage of high society and events. Besides the Sunday supplement, does any of that sound familiar? Perhaps you should pull up Mic.com, that's M-I-C.com, or the Huffington Post for a second to jog your memory. This realization was a common occurrence during the writing of this book. I often felt I could take media criticism written 100 years ago, change a few words, and describe exactly how blogs work. Knowing the trademarks of yellow journalism from this era made it possible for me to know how to give blogs what they want in this era. But more on that later. As the daily sales of these papers soared, they became incredibly attractive opportunities for advertisers, particularly with the advent of large corporations and department stores. The rates these new advertisers paid propelled newspapers to boost readership even more. Master promoters like Bennett, Pulitzer, and William Randolph Hearst delivered. Their skyrocketing circulations were driven by one thing: sensationalism. Welcome to the intersection of the one-off problem and the ad-driven journalism. Just as James Gordon Bennett embodied the era of sensational yellow journalism, another man, Adolph S. Ochs, publisher of the New York Times, ushered in the next iteration of news. Ochs, like most great businessmen, understood that doing things differently was the way to great wealth. In the case of his newly acquired newspaper and the dirty, broken world of yellow journalism, he made the pronouncement that, quote-unquote, decency meant dollars. He immediately set out to change the conditions that allowed Bennett, Hearst, Pulitzer, and their imitators to flourish. He was the first publisher to solicit subscriptions via telephone. He offered contests to his salesmen. He gave them quotas and goals for the number of subscribers they were expected to bring in. He understood that people bought the yellow papers because they were cheap, and they didn't have any other options. He felt that if they had a choice, they'd pick something better. He intended to be that option. First, he would match his competitors' prices, and then he would deliver a paper that far surpassed the value implied by the low price. It worked. When he dropped the price of the Times to 1 cent, circulation tripled in the first year. He would compete on content. He came up with the phrase, quote, all the news that's fit to print, end quote, as a mission statement for the editorial staff 2 months after taking over the paper. The less known runner up says almost as much, quote, all the world's news but not a school for scandal, end quote. I don't want to exaggerate. The transition to a stable press was by no means immediate, and it didn't immediately transform the competition. But subscription did set forth new conditions in which the newspaper and the newspaper man had incentives more closely aligned with the needs of their readers. The end of that wave of journalism meant that papers were sold to readers by subscriptions, and all the ills of yellow journalism have swift repercussions in a subscription model. Readers who are misled unsubscribe. Errors must be corrected in the following day's issue, and the needs of the newsboys no longer drive the daily headlines. A subscription model, whether it's music or news, offers necessary subsidies to the nuance that is lacking in the kind of stories that flourish in one-off distribution. Opposing views can now be included. Uncertainty can be acknowledged. Humanity can be allowed. Since articles don't have to spread on their own, but rather as part of the unit, the whole newspaper or album or collection, publishers do not need to exploit valence to drive single-use buyers. With Ox's move, reputation began to matter more than notoriety. Reporters started social clubs where they critiqued one another's work. Some began talk of unionizing. Mainly, they began to see journalism as a profession, and from this they developed rules and codes of conduct. They've given those up by now, for sure. The professionalization of journalism meant applying new ideas to how stories were found, written, and presented. For the first time, it created a sense of obligation, not just to the paper and circulation, but also to the audience. Just as Bennett had his imitators, so did Ox. In fact, the press has imitated the principles he built into the New York Times since he took it over. Even now, when someone buys a paper at a newsstand, they don't survey the headlines and buy the most sensational. They buy the paper they trust. The same goes for what radio stations they listen to and television news they watch. This is the subscription model, the brand model, invented by Ox, internalized. It is selling on subscription and not by the story. I'm not saying it is a perfect system by any means. I don't want to imply that newspapers in the 20th century were paragons of honesty or accuracy or embraced change immediately. As late as the 1970s, papers like the New Orleans Times Picayune were still heavily dependent on street and newsstand sales, and thus continued to play up and sensationalize crime stories. Got more left in this chapter than I thought. The subscription model may have been free of the corruptive influence of the masses, but that didn't spare it from corruption from the top. As the character Philip Marlowe observed in Raymond Chandler's novel The Long Goodbye, quote, newspapers are owned and published by rich men. Rich men all belong to the same club. Sure, there's competition, hard, tough competition for circulation, for news beats, for exclusive stories, just so long as it doesn't damage the prestige and privilege and position of the owners. End quote. This was incisive media criticism, in fiction no less, that was later echoed with damning evidence by theorists such as Noam Chomsky and Ben Bagdikian. A friend put it more bluntly, quote, each generation of media has a different cock in its mouth, end quote. At least these at least there was once an open discussion about the problems of the media. Today, not only are the toxic economics of blogs obscured, but tech gurus on the take actually defend them. We have the old problems plus a host of new ones. The death of subscription, rebirth of media manipulation. For most of the last century, the majority of journalism and entertainment was sold by subscription, the third phase. It is now sold again online a la carte, as a one off. Each story must sell itself, must be heard over all the others, but be it in Google News, on Twitter, or on your Facebook wall. This one off problem is exactly like the one faced by the Yellow Press a century or more ago, and it distorts today's news just as it did then. Only now it's amplified by a million blogs instead of a few hundred newspapers. As Eli Pariser put it in the filter bubble, when it comes to news on the internet, quote, each article ascends the most forwarded lists or dies an ignominious death on its own. The attention economy is ripping the binding, and the pages that get read are the pages that are frequently the most topical, scandalous, and viral. End quote. People don't read one blog. They read a constant assortment of many blogs, and so there's little incentive to build trust. Competition for readers is on a per article basis, taking publishers right back to the digital street corner yelling, "War is coming," to sell papers. It takes them back to making things up to fill the insatiable need for new news. The Pulitzer Prize or Pulitzer Prize winning biographer Robert Caro, a former reporter for Newsday, was interviewed by a blog called Gothamist around his 80th birthday. The reporter explained to him how journalism worked these days. Quote, there's something called Chartbeat. It shows you how many people are reading a specific article in any given moment and how long they spend on that article. That's called engagement time. We have a giant flat screen on the wall that displays it. A lot of publications do. End quote. Caro's response was perfect. Quote, what you just said is the worst thing I ever heard. End quote. The interview continues. Quote, interviewer, headlines and other tools are used to get people to click on an article. It reduces what might be a piece of nuanced writing to the most salacious tidbit. So the power broker might be headlined, Robert Moses is a racist, whatever, or a racist, whatever. Um, and someone did this recently, you might try something like the 11 most shocking things in the power broker. It just crushes all nuance. Caro, what you just told me, I'm thinking about when I was a reporter and they were reading something of mine, and if the engagement time of whatever was 2 seconds, I'd shoot myself. And, and that whole um, bit of dialogue quote. He says it because he actually cares about what he writes, because his hugely important books were designed to last, what I call perennial sellers, not get a short spike of attention and disappear. But sadly, the current system and the current tools with which to measure them don't encourage that kind of thing. Think about how we consume content online. It is not by subscription. The only viable subscription method for blogs, RSS, is long dead. Just look at the top referring sources for traffic to major websites and blogs. Cumulatively, these referring sources almost always account for more visitors than the site's direct traffic, i.e., people who typed in the URL. Though it varies from site to site, the biggest sources of traffic are usually, in varying order, Google, Facebook, Twitter. The viewers were sent directly to a specific article for a disposable purpose. They're not subscribers, they are seekers or glancers. This is great news for a media manipulator, bad news for everyone else. The death of subscription means that instead of attempting to provide value to you, the longtime reader, blogs are constantly chasing other readers, the mythical reader out in viral land. Instead of providing quality day in and day out, writers chase big hits like a sexy scandal or a funny video meme. Bloggers aren't interested in building up consistent, loyal readerships, whether it's via paid subscription or even email, because what they really need are the types of stories that will do hundreds of thousands or millions of page views. They need stories that will sell. There is this naive belief that readers have: if news is important, I'll hear about it. I would argue the opposite. It's mostly the least important news that will find you. It's the extreme stuff that cuts through the noise. It's the boring information, the secret stuff that people don't want you to know, that you'll miss. That's the stuff you have to subscribe to, that you pay for, that you have to chase. Ain't that the truth? That's why we're always talking about what else is going on that they're distracting us from. As a marketer, getting something controversial to blow up is easy, and it's the tactic a media manipulator prefers to use over doing something important. With limited resources and the constraints of a tight medium, there are only a handful of options: sensationalism, extremism, sex, scandal, hatred. The media manipulator knows that bloggers know that these things sell, so that's what we sell them. Whereas subscriptions are about trust, single use traffic is all immediacy and impulse, even if the news has to be distorted to trigger it. Our news is what rises, and what rises is what spreads, and what spreads is what makes us angry or makes us laugh. Our media diet is quickly transformed into junk food. Fake stories engineered by people like me to be consumed and passed around. It is the refined and processed sugars of the information food pyramid, out of the ordinary, unnatural, and deliberately sweetened. Inside the chaos, it is easy to mislead. Only the exciting, sensational stuff finds readers, the stories that blow up. Reporters don't have time for follow ups or reasoned critiques, only quick hits. Blogs are all chasing the same types of stories. The mass media chase blogs, and the readers are following both of them, and everyone is led astray. The reason paid subscription and RSS was abandoned was because in a subscription economy, the users are in control. In the one off model, the competition might be more vicious, but it is in the terms but it is on the terms of the publisher. Having followers instead of subscribers, where readers have to check back on sites often and are barraged with a stream of refreshing content laden with ads, is much better for their bottom line. When the blogger Andrew Sullivan switched his site to a subscription model a few years ago, his analysis of the situation was striking. He called subscription, quote, the purest, simplest model for online journalism: you, us, and a meter. Period. No corporate ownership, no advertising demands, no pressure for page views. Just a concept designed to make your reading experience as good as possible and to lead us not into temptation. End quote. Way too many outlets are led into temptation. It's good for business and it's fun. I've noticed that a lot of the alternative media now, yeah, I'd say the three biggest I can think of, are all subscription based. It's interesting. Be the news you want to see in the world. Knowing all this, my strategy has always been: if I want to be written about, I do things they have to write about. When I advised a client to shoot the book he'd just written off into space, it wasn't for scientific exploration. It was because doing something like that is so unusual. The media couldn't resist writing about it. The same went for another author I worked with who held an atheist church service in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We tried to name the Planned Parenthood clinic after Tucker Max because we weren't content to sit around and hope that people saw the book as controversial. We wanted to do something. Like we wanted to do something controversial, and all these stunts got considerable attention because the coverage was good for the outlets. They raked in all sorts of readers from it. A few years ago, my company Brass Check got tired of dishonest marketers pretending to be able to create best-selling books that in reality were just Amazon.com category bestsellers. An easy feat when you can be quote unquote number one new releases in Freemasonry for an hour. So we did a stunt where we illustrated just how easy it was to create these bestsellers. It took 5 minutes and $3, and we did indeed publish a fake book that hit number one in the transpersonal movements category. But it was the fact that we actually did it that allowed for all the coverage. This wasn't our opinion, it was proof. The post we wrote explaining the mechanics behind the stunt got over 500,000 views, and the subsequent coverage got even more. A reporter from the Toronto Sun recreated the stunt herself just to see if it really was that easy. It was, and that meant more front page coverage for us. Inquiries to our company shot through the roof. The great Daniel Boorstin called these things pseudo events. Why does a movie have a premiere? So the celebrities will show up and the media will cover it. Why does a politician hold a press conference? For the attention. A quick run down the list of pseudo events shows their indispensability to the news business. Press releases, award ceremonies, red carpet events, product launches, anniversaries, grand openings, leaks, the contrite celebrity interview after a scandal, the sex tape, the tell-all, the public statement, controversial advertisements, marches on Washington, press junkets, and on and on. These pseudo events, put on for the sole purpose of generating headlines and media coverage, are real in the sense that they do exist, but they are fake in the sense that they are completely artificial. The event is not intended to accomplish anything itself, but instead to introduce certain narratives into the media. If nobody covered them, it'd be like a tree falling in the woods. Pseudo events are the media manipulator's secret weapon. Blog economics both depend on and indulge in pseudo events even more than old media. They thrive on the artificiality. Because it's planned, staged, and designed for coverage, pseudo news is a kind of news subsidy. It is handed to blogs like a glass of water to a thirsty man. As deadlines get tighter and news staffs get smaller, fake events are exactly what bloggers need. More important because they are clean, clear, and not constrained by the limits of what happens naturally. Pseudo events are typically much more interesting to publishers than real events. If you do something newsworthy, that is, by today's standards, something controversial, strange, weird, hilarious, or polarizing, you will be in the news. It's that simple. And that explains exactly why so many fucking idiots are millionaires. Because they do stupid, sensational shit, and it blows up. All right, that is the end of that chapter. That puts us on to chapter 9 for next time, which hopefully I will do on Tuesday. I'm trying to get back into my schedule, and it's not been working. But we'll be on to Tactic 6, Make It All About the Headline. And, yeah, we're a little past a third of the way through the book, I'd say, just glancing at it. Oh, all right, let's see who's around. Ooh, take those things off. Oh. Okay, we've got Vesper. Zeus is on. Who else? The fifth element. Oh, let's go over and see what Vesper's doing, shall we? Um, bear with me just a couple of minutes. Give him 1 or 2 minutes of your time. Say hi. Um, I will take us on over there, and I will see you in a minute. something interesting.
Wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not much luck I had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places. I'm giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me it's not happening. Tell me it's not happening. Surrender myself. I feel the world collapsing, but not much luck I had, but more sophisticated into love relations. Now disassembling my own heart, 'cause my mind's a million places. I'm giving up. So it's in my head. So tell me